Hi HR Nation, welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Today we have a special guest on the show. We're joined by Steve Beauchamp, CEO at Paylocity. How are you doing, Steve?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I love taking an inside look into your home workspace. We learn so much about each other, right?
Yeah, I've definitely been doing this for a while, working from home, and feeling pretty comfortable with it, but also glad to be back in the office. A couple of weeks.
It's lovely to see the team, right? We was discussing before we went live, like the energy, the creativity, the collaboration. You just can't really recreate. Yeah, virtual has its place, but you just can't recreate that.
Yeah, I think having a mix of both feels like a little bit of the best of the both worlds in terms of being able to see people face to face and feel that energy of being in small groups.
Definitely. Before we go any further, tell everyone a little bit about yourself personally and your background and journey to where we are now.
Sure. I've been CEO of Paylocity now for over 4 years. And so my Paylocity journey started when we had about 100 employees and just a few thousand customers. And so that's progressed pretty remarkably over the last 14 years, where we now have over roughly 4,000 employees and approaching 30,000 customers. And so a lot of change in those last 14 years. But I've actually been in this industry for my entire career. So graduated college and actually started in sales for ADP. So one of the big players in the industry, kind of went back to school, did an MBA, and then kind of took a very odd route. I went and worked for a really small entrepreneurial company with less than 20 employees, and an individual who owned that company who really wanted to build it up a little bit and retire. We did that for about 2.5 years, ended up at a company that tried to go IPO, but was bought by another big player in the industry, Paychex. And so spent 5 years at Paychex really running product for Paychex. And that kind of tells you a little bit in terms of where my background's been. I've been in sales, operations, product, but product is really where my passion is, and where I probably still today spend, a slightly disproportionate amount of my time.
What was this that kept you in the space? So it's quite often, people move around industries. What is keeps you attracted and engaged?
Well, probably like you as a young child, I always wanted to be in HR.
I couldn't wait.
Couldn't wait to jump into HR, payroll compliance, some of the fun things. I think in many ways you start in that first job and you're just trying to make a career out of it. You're trying to do the best that you can. And over time, I started to love the industry. Probably didn't start that way. I love the fact that, it had a combination of innovation, creativity, but also a ton of people interaction, and combining, I guess, my passion for being innovative and creative, but really having a people focus to it and feeling like you can really have an impact with people, I think is what's really made it interesting. And then we really focus on kind of, let's call it medium to maybe a little bit larger companies, but we're not in the Fortune 1000 space. And the reason I love that space specifically is they've often been underserved with tools and technology. So the biggest companies, can buy anything, they have big projects and so on. And these mid-sized companies, they kind of struggle with that. So not only do I kind of love the space because of the innovation creativity, but I also really like helping customers who, in our opinion, at least historically, have been underserved from a technology perspective.
You're right, because you either have the kind of huge budgets to go for those large organizations, or you're kind of stuck with some solutions that aren't really up to scratch, but you're kind of servicing that middle market, which for a long time has been underserved. Like I'm with you on that. And like you, I didn't plan on doing this. Like you said, I got my first job as a teenager, literally 17, selling products to HR executives. I think back then it wasn't even HR, it was like personnel relations, in the UK. I certainly didn't, do it because I loved it. I needed a job. I was 17, and then I kind of fell in love with it over the years, and the value that our show and the what do we do impacts employees all over the world. And that's why I get out of bed every day, right? Is the impact.
Yeah, and I kind of ended up in the industry the same way. One of my summer jobs in college, I worked in a payroll department for a government agency. And so when I graduated college and I had a business degree, I didn't have a ton of experience, and that was one of the only places I had experience. So that's kind of how I ended up at ADP. Would
you say your experience as in that company that was very much small and entrepreneurial kind of helped you out when you kind of moved back into a larger organization, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's interesting career path because you start with a really large company, benefit from some of the training developed in first time career. And then after I went back and did my MBA, I jumped complete opposite, really small, less than 20 employees, less than $1 million in revenue. And the value there was I actually had to do every single job.
Exactly.
I'm out there selling customers. I'm implementing customers. I'm talking to customers that have concerns. I even got into some of the backroom stuff when we were producing W-2s. I remember pulling all-nighters, actually packaging the W-2s back when they were all printed. And so I really learned a lot about every aspect of the job. And I do think that even today, because of that, I can, go back with some of that knowledge and still have a deeper understanding of some of maybe the details about how we actually run the business. Mm-hmm. It's been really helpful to me.
Yeah. I get the same thing back from a lot of our employees who join us, that they're like, wow, I'm exposed to so much: sales, marketing, operation, everything, the entire part. And they're like, wow, like there's so much more. And that was obviously a big eye opener for me when I started the company. It was like, wow, I have to kind of do everything. There's no one else to ask or to turn to at that point. But it's so exciting though, and engaging. And like for me, it was stressful, but it's like, this is so cool. I get to learn all these new skills and implement them and bring this idea to life and see it all the way through end to end as well. Even before kind of pre-pandemic, we always heard about the future of work. It's kind of the buzzword of the day. How has the pandemic changed the future of work? What are you seeing and hearing from your customers and everyone around you?
I think pre-pandemic, some of the current trends that we're seeing accelerate already existed and were certainly happening, but at a much slower pace. And in my opinion, a lot of those trends were being driven in some cases just by Gen Z entering the workforce and by some of the younger millennials getting into decision-making positions, and then starting to maybe insert more flexibility into the workforce, more transparency, really a different way to actually think about things. But that was a kind of a slow change.
Yeah.
And I think what ends up happening as the pandemic hit, people had to rethink things really quickly, really fast. And so the obvious one is just remote work, which was really already happening at a slower rate. We've been doing remote work for over 10 years, but most organizations didn't do a lot of that. And so that's an example of an acceleration of a trend that was already there, and people had to figure it out really quickly. I think the other thing is it put a lot of pressure on communication. So you're used to doing the town hall meetings, everybody in the same room. And now organizations say, how do I get information to all of my people when they're working from home all the time? And you saw a lot of pressure. There was already a trend towards different methods of communication. The singular method of being in front of a group of people in a training class just didn't work anymore. Sometimes it's taking online courses. Sometimes it's actually leveraging video communication. Sometimes it's doing internal podcasts like we're doing right now. And so you saw these mediums starting to grow, but really at a slower rate. And you saw kind of creativity come alive really in the pandemic, which is I need to connect with my employees in a variety of different ways, because sitting in front of a Zoom meeting all day is probably not the answer to keeping people connected. And so I think we saw a lot of changes in terms of trends that had already started really accelerate over the last year.
Do you think this has affected the overall digital transformation? Because we've been talking about digital transformation for a long time. Different companies are at different stages of the journey. How far do you think we've leapfrogged forward? Yeah,
I think we've actually leapt forward relatively quickly. I think individuals that are part of a larger organization probably don't always have the appreciation for sometimes how smaller organizations still have a lot of things done manually. So in many cases, if someone comes on our platform for performance reviews, they were kind of doing it in Word or Google Docs. Mm-hmm. Or if somebody is, looking to automate, benefit enrollment or onboarding, those were often paper-based processes for a lot of our smaller customers. Well, you can't do that. You're not face-to-face in front of somebody. No. So what we saw is a lot more demand for digital automation solutions throughout the pandemic, because now you actually have no other way to be able to do that. Now, the benefit of that, though, is you're going to appear much more modern and technology savvy to your employees. And so I don't think it's a one-time trend, because once you start that way and everything becomes automated, you're not going back. It's a much more efficient process, obviously, but it's also a much better user experience for the employees that either joining your firm or going through an annual enrollment or whatever that transaction looks like. And so we definitely saw more demand, particularly in our market space, for digital automation across the entire suite of human capital management.
And as you said earlier, like the new generation coming in is expected Like they're having this user experience, outside of it in the B2C world, like through Amazon or through on Netflix or through, they expect, I had someone recently, a CHRO, say, Chris, we rolled out a new app to our employees and we had all of these online trainings of how you use the tools. And they were really concerned because they had zero uptake and zero views across all the content. But when they looked into it a bit more detail, what they realized is the reason no one was watching the videos is it was so easy.
Yeah.
No, you don't need to tell someone how to use an app, or maybe, the new generation, how do you open an app and navigate? They know how to do that as well. So companies have really had to play catch up. It's been really frustrating for a long time.
That's a great point. And I think one of the things that we saw accelerate as well during the pandemic is people do feel comfortable using applications. And even those that were a little less comfortable before are more comfortable now.
Yeah.
But they want those applications to feel like the applications they use in their personal
already.
life, right? They don't want something that's really hard to use and that they actually have to learn. And so part of the answer is, if you've got to put me through a training course to actually use
You've already lost.
You've already lost, right? Because I'm probably not going to do the training course. And if it's not intuitive enough. So it's got to feel like a very social experience, like I do in the rest of all the things I use in my personal life.
What are the sort of key lessons or takeaways that you've taken as a CEO during this period? I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think I go back to one of the points I made earlier in terms of how communication really has to be different. We did a lot of the things that other companies did internally, which is we would have kind of quarterly meetings with all of our employees. We'd talk about key initiatives. We'd update everything about what's going on. In fact, we'd even survey people ahead of time to figure out what topics they might want to have. And you can imagine it's a prepared session. You hear from different parts of the organization. And we got really good feedback after those meetings. People really enjoyed them. Well, you couldn't do that. Some of those were in person, some of those were online, since we were already, almost half our company was remote prior to the pandemic. But what we really learned is that wasn't necessarily the most effective for this kind of new age of communication. So we actually started doing weekly half-hour sessions where people were chatting in kind of questions live, and it was real time, and it was very kind of podcast-like in many ways. Mm-hmm. And so I would have my team on board and we would just answer questions live, because we're in a time of heavy uncertainty at the start of the pandemic. People are really worried. And that was so much more effective than the prepared meeting, the session, and honestly, the authentic and
I was about to say that. It does,
like that's the whole key.
There's a lot of pressure though on you as a CEO though, right? To have that on the fly, because that's why a lot of companies don't do that. They're so worried about questions coming up, people asking things and not having the answers, but you don't have to have the answers or all the answers.
I think being honest and authentic, go back that time period a year ago, and obviously people are worried about their jobs. They don't know the impact of the pandemic as a whole. They're worried about their friends and family. They're worried about COVID and illness. And obviously this, we're just past the anniversary of George Floyd's death. So there was a lot of social unrest here as well. And obviously there still is a lot of movement around that. But you put all of that into a Q&A environment live, and you get a whole host of different questions. And I think this idea of being over-prepared, it doesn't come across very well. It doesn't come across as authentic, and it's not really the new world of communication. And although intuitively I kind of knew that, I didn't really experience that the way I had to. So today, we still do sessions every 2 weeks. We survey people ahead of time to collect questions. We let people chat in questions live, and we still get way better feedback from that format than we've ever had before. And then the other thing we've done, and this is another great example, is the use of video. Okay, so we were already doing Zoom meetings. I was used to that. But oftentimes I might send a note within kind of our platform, an announcement that people can react to. And we thought that was really the most modern thing. And we really started to use asynchronous video much more. So instead of having to sit in a Zoom meeting, I do a ton of videos to record. And so besides having those sessions, I would do a video each week. And it would sometimes be 2 minutes, sometimes be 3 minutes. And so all my leaders today still do asynchronous videos all the time. And so people can consume them when they want.
Again, that experience we're talking about.
And they get this experience. And by the way, here's what I would tell you is you don't need a whole bunch of preparation. When I first started, you could imagine.
Over-prepare, right? It's so easy.
Do I write out a script? I'm recording it 6 or 7 times. I'm deleting it. I'm deleting it. And then I would say by the 6th or 7th,
you just do it on your mobile, just hold it up and just film yourself. But again, that's what we video call each other, right, on our mobile phones. We don't sit there and write out a script before we send our friends and family members a video. So why would we do it any different?
Right. Yeah. And so, we just embed this now in our platform that you can do these video messages and then distribute it to the entire organization.
Oh, you do it within the app, within your own.
Within our platform. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
You just hit record video and you can do it live, you can preview it and then you send it out. But I don't ever take a second cut. Because sometimes if I stumble over my words or I have to go back and make a different point, it actually, the funny thing is I probably was my fourth or fifth video. I had a couple people saying that was your best video yet. And it was the one I recorded once. I kind of fumbled on kind of what I said. I recovered, and it made me realize that, wait a minute, like the idea is real, authentic, not rehearsed. And we really have taken that to heart. So much of our communication happens this way. And by the way, if I'm sitting at home in a t-shirt or whatever I'm wearing, that's fine too. Like you don't have to be over-engineered around how you do that. And so high frequency, real time, so in the moment, and really authentic was probably the key things that we've learned in terms of what has resonated the most with our people.
Obviously, during this, we didn't do everything perfect, but so looking back, is there anything you'd have done differently, though?
That's a great question. I think like most organizations, the uncertainty was very concerning for a lot of orgs. So we didn't know how deep the pandemic was going to go. And so fortunately, we never laid anybody off. That was a commitment we made to our employees right up front. But I actually would have continued to hire if I had to do it all over again, because, you don't know what that future looks like. You get a little bit conservative. And there's things like investments in our product that, we halted for several months. And it's obviously a tough market to be able to find talented people. And if in hindsight, that probably would have been a great opportunity to be able to continue to hire and invest in it, especially because we've got, a lot of confidence in the future of our business. But like most businesses, we just kind of halted. We try to figure out where we're at. And maybe that's just hindsight's 2020. But I think making too many big changes in terms of where the business was going, at least for a knowledge working business like ourselves, I get, someone in a restaurant or something like that's totally different scenario. But for us, we did halt some investments that I think has put us a few months behind in hindsight.
Yeah, well, that's understandable. Given and I'm with you on that as well. That's something I would also say for us. We should have made more hires and which would have accelerated where we are now, but we don't know what we don't know. So, and let's be honest, every month it was, you didn't know where it was coming or going, and you're open, you're closed, and even more complicated where you are because state by state, it's completely different. So we don't even, even in the UK, we don't have states, but it was like town by town. So it was so you just didn't know what was happening. As well,
for sure. And dealing with all of the questions you get from our team operating in those different environments as well, like our employees or our clients' employees. And then the amount of regulation change was also really high too, right? So, Congress passing different bills and how's that going to affect people in the PPP loan. So it was interesting because we were seeing more activity with our customers than ever before, even though our customers had less employees on their platform, which impacted our revenue. And so I think, a very complicated environment. Interesting
to know. Did you have like because I'm assuming you had a lot of companies that came to you kind of interested, obviously, given what was happening. But when did they start kind of making commitments? Because I saw a lot of the partners I was working with saying, Chris, our inquiries have gone through the roof. But then they're still not they're still not taking the last, just the sign on the dotted line. And it felt like 6 to 8 months later, then all of a sudden we saw this spike in companies adopting technology in various areas. So
I think here in the US, at least what we saw in terms of activity levels, the states that were hit hardest, the earliest, you would see activity levels drop kind of across the board. So people were trying to figure out, when am I going to be able to reopen, at what level, and so on and so forth. And then as states started to reopen, you would start to see that activity level increase. I think only recently, call it the last couple months, as we've seen broader reopenings across the country, have we actually seen activity levels recover. Besides that, it was happening in pockets. Knowledge working businesses were still kind of operating. Some of them were still able to grow. So we were still bringing on customers and still growing our business, but not nearly at the rate we were before, largely because of the impact that we saw in the marketplace. But I would say today, there's a fair amount of energy and excitement around the reopening, and we're starting to see that level of activity really rebound at pre-pandemic levels.
We spoke about a few tools already, but what are some of the other tools do you think that businesses need and HR leaders need for their organizations to perform, at a high level and also provide that employee experience?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that probably was way down on the list pre-pandemic is you've got to have a tool to be able to communicate and connect with people in a really engaging and interesting way. And it's got to really mirror the social experience that you have. And that tool really can't be email because that's a lot of time.
or an intranet.
Right, or an old school intranet,
Yeah.
and honestly, that tool is not really Zoom itself, right? That could be used for meetings like we're having, or group meetings, or webinars. But you've got to find ways for people to interact in multiple different ways. And so, we got a lot of usage out of our social tool we call Community, and so that allows organizations to post announcements. The announcements can be in video, they can be in text, they can have images. People can react. They can react with a GIF image. They can interact with emojis. They can comment, they can follow people. And especially in an environment where you've got workers working from home in different places, and you can organize your company into different groups, and they can collaborate in different ways. And so we saw a tremendous increase in activity. That is a free part of our platform, so every customer has it. And we saw so many customers saying, I didn't think I really wanted to implement this before, but now I actually need to it.
We need it.
That whole group announcement, the video being embedded into the platform, being a really big driver, that's an area we saw a huge increase, and we're still seeing an increase there. This idea of connecting and communicating with employees. And I think the second thing is probably another obvious one, which is learning. So I'm not in a classroom environment. And so I know that Zoom fatigue is real. And if I have meeting after meeting and I'm onboarding new hires this way, how do I get some of that learning done asynchronously so that people can do it on their own time, and that they're maybe not in an 8-hour training session? Maybe I can shrink that training session to 4 or 5 hours, and I can have some asynchronous exercises or learning that can be done. And so we saw a lot of interaction with our learning management system as well. And that really increased. And then the third thing I would say, just to round it out, is surveys and feedback. So gaining feedback from employees.
Yeah, critical.
You got to do that on an ongoing basis. So many decisions we made in the last year. My first response is, well, what do people think? And we can't just go ask them. We could do roundtables and we could do all that kind of stuff virtually, but it's really quick and easy to do a poll or to actually launch a survey and get, immediate feedback from folks. And involving people in those decisions is really, really key. I think that was important pre-pandemic, but when you're not able to make those in-person personal connections, it's even more important that people feel like they have different ways to still have a voice.
Yeah. And also to recognize each other. It was another huge one, right? That's something I missed, even as a small team, walking over to my sales team and saying congratulations on that deal. Or that, we missed that part. We became disconnected and as well. I hope you don't take this as a criticism. I knew about your business beforehand, but what I was surprised when we started working together is the breadth of the solutions you offer. Because when I thought Paylocity, I thought obviously payroll and some of the other areas, but you have such a broad range of solutions in the platform that I think not everyone is aware of. I hope you don't mind me saying that.
Yeah, I think part of that's even in the name, right? Pay being part of the name, is certainly there. And we've been on a journey to really expand the breadth of the product. So if you go back 7 or 8 years ago, you might not have made that same comment, but we're really passionate about building interesting product and really starting small and innovating in a very agile fashion. So we've added a lot over the last several years, and so we really cover talent management, all the talent management components, the onboarding, recruiting, performance management, compensation, et cetera. We cover benefits. We've got time and labor covered. We've got obviously payroll as a key part of our equation, but we've also added things that people wouldn't think are payroll or HR companies, like the survey products built into our platform. A video capability is built into our platform. This community product that I talked about. We've got a rewards and recognition module where you can do badging and recognize people. And so, that's been a key part. Our goal really is we want to have the most modern platform so that we can really help our clients, not only just with utilizing the platform for digital transformation, but we want to help them make them better employers. We really want to make their employee value proposition come alive and give them a whole bunch of different ways to do that. And I think we're still early in that journey. And in many ways, the trends that have accelerated through the pandemic, that message is becoming more important as we talk to customers in the marketplace. It's not just about digital automation. It's, okay, you're going to save me some time and I'm going to have a better experience for my employees. But now, what am I going to do with that time? And how am I going to differentiate myself as an employer as the economy recovers and the talent market's getting pretty tight?
What do you think the impact is going to be for companies that don't move fast enough and that don't adopt this technology?
I think ignoring some of these trends in the marketplace will not allow companies to both retain and attract employees. I think you already saw before the pandemic, especially as the newer generation, they were asking more from their organizations. They wanted to understand career paths more. They were being very vocal about what's happening within their, environments and socially, and how the business is responding to that. All of these things were already happening. This is now accelerating. And so if you want to take the stance of, hey, there's work and you come and you do a good job and it doesn't bleed into your home life, your work life, your values, your beliefs, and then you go home and then that's a separate thing, you're not going to be able to keep people. That is just not the way people think about it. It is combined, it's intertwined. And I want to be who I am at home and at work, and they need to kind of blend together. And so organizations who don't embrace that idea are going to have a very, very difficult time retaining people. And they're also going to have a hard time finding people because a lot of that information is democratized in this internet world, and people do their research and they have opportunities to select different companies. And so it's a completely different environment. And so the more that you can make sure your employees are engaged and happy and are brand ambassadors for you, for other employees, the better chance you have of growing your business. When that starts to go sideways and people get really dissatisfied, it's not just your employees that know about it, it's potential employees that know about it. It might even be your customers. And so the tie to the human capital of an organization has never been stronger. And for that reason, to me, the role of the CHRO is now more important than ever, and the entire HR team. And so I think that's why we're starting to see people pay attention to that. I don't think everybody believes what I just said, by the way, but I think more and more people are starting to actually feel that, see it, and believe it.
You're 100% right, and I can tell you from speaking to HR executive every day, they're seeing it. Even in my personal circle of friends and family members, I've got friends that are that have worked for companies for many, many years who are now saying to me, Chris, you know what? I'm actually thinking about other opportunities. And when I ask them what the drivers are, it's exactly what you're talking about. It's since this last year that they've become disengaged, that the company doesn't have the right tools, technologies, and frameworks to actually do remote work in a way that is engaging for people, the learnings, all of the elements that we've been discussing for the last half an hour as well. And these are people that love their organization, that love their teams, but are actually having an experience right now just making them think, you know what? I don't think this is actually aligned with my why or my purpose or where I want to be. And I was like, wow, I never thought you'd leave the company, and I'm seeing it, and companies are starting to feel it. We're just at the beginning.
And I think a lot of companies don't know what to do. Like that's even those that are they feel like, okay, this is happening, but I don't know what to do. So we did something kind of, I think, pretty interesting and unique for our industry. We launched a modern workforce index score with all of our customers. And so we use kind of our data science team to grab data across all the platform. And we see, what are people saying in community? How positive or negative are those comments? How engaged are they with when you're communicating to them and announcements that you might have? And then we actually provide a score. And that score is actually benchmarked by industry, because it's kind of understandable, a knowledge worker versus maybe someone who's got 20 different restaurant locations, different dynamics with their workforce. But that's benchmarked specific to your industry. And then we have a recommendation engine that tells them, here's things you can do to get your employees more engaged. And so sometimes it's launching a pulse survey to see how people are feeling. Sometimes it's, new hire and exit surveys, maybe they're not doing. Other times it's just, you need to let people know what's going on. You got to post an announcement and so on. And so we've got a whole bunch of recommendations, maybe a more modern approach towards performance management, where you're not doing it once a year. And that has been a really interesting. We just launched that to all of our customers recently. The group of customers that we had on board have given us great feedback. And the benefit of something like this is the more data and utilization you get in the platform, the better the recommendations get and the more actions people can take. And so we're excited about trying to help our customers solve that problem, because they are starting to feel it, but they don't know exactly what to do. And a lot of these HR teams are stretched pretty thin. So the easier you can make it to launch and get done, then the better utilization you're going to get.
That's really cool, by the way. And that you've launched that as well, and you benchmark it via industry as well. And you probably sat down with a team, was like, why weren't we doing this before? Why did we have this? This is amazing. And as you said, the more data points, the more years that you continue to do this for, it's going to be really enriched and actually a huge value add of your product and what you do.
Well, Yeah, and a huge value add to beyond the HR organization. You
Yeah,
think
yeah,
of
of
a
course.
CEO of a 200 employee company, and they're thinking, well, okay, how are we doing? I've got the benchmark to other organizations. I've got a recommendation engine. And the reality, though, is because I think if you think of a classic human capital management platform, it kind of gets boxed into the transactions. It's
Mm,
benefit enrollment, it's time and labor, it's getting people paid. But once you move beyond transactions and you start seeing peer-to-peer interaction from one employee to the next, and you see a lot of text-based data in your platform, it could be survey data, it could be performance management data. It's these community interactions that you have across the organization. I'm not sure this opportunity actually existed 3 years ago to do it
no.
without having that data set. And now, you do have more and more of our companies using this. That makes it, much more powerful in terms of what those recommendations are. And because we've got nearly 30,000 customers, we can source the best practices across that in an anonymized way where we're obviously, managing privacy by an individual customer, but really make that recommendation engine much more pourpowerful.
Love that. I feel like we could do another hour, but I have to let you go at some point. So before I let you go on, we have a quick fire round that I do with each guest. You have no longer than 30 seconds to answer each question. No pressure. What was the number one thing that was holding you back from becoming a CEO?
I would tell you that I didn't have as much go-to-market experience early on. I started in sales, and I went into operations and product. And I think sometimes just having the best idea or the best product is one part of the equation, but really figuring out how do you get that to market in an efficient way. I think I learned that later on in my career, particularly as we launched new products at my role at Paychex and figuring out what worked and what didn't work. And then I think as I moved into the CEO job at Paylocity, that's an area that I was able to develop into.
Mm-hmm. You are right though, right? You get the best product in the world, but if you don't have a good go-to-market strategy, it doesn't really matter as well. What's the best piece of business advice you've received over the years?
I think that probably early on, it's being somewhat fearless and curious in your learning. And so I think that's something I've been able to do. I get into a meeting with 20 different people on a topic I wasn't that knowledgeable. I just wasn't afraid to ask questions and not really afraid to be embarrassed. And because I think that curiosity and learning is really what propels you from one opportunity to the next. And I think a lot of people feel like I need to become knowledgeable first before I can kind of contribute and be part of the conversation. But be part of that conversation early, and take some chances that way. And I think your learning will accelerate.
Yeah, love that, because I have the same experience with my team. When the pandemic hit, we were massively impacted because a lot of what we did was face to face, and I didn't have the answers, right, of where we're going and what we're going to do. And I'd sat down on a team and said, I don't know, but together we're going to come, we're going to get through this. And the engagement, you're kind of giving them permission to come with ideas and be vulnerable and disrupt what we do. It creates that magic, in the room as well. And people in the future will come to you if they have an issue or a suggestion. And you don't have to have all the answers. But it took me a while to get comfortable with that as well. It wasn't easy. In such a fast-paced, disrupting environment we find ourselves in, how do you stay up to date with what's happening around you in the industry? Are there any particular websites, tools, apps? How, as a CEO, how do you stay up to date?
Yeah. So I'd say a few things. So I think first is really making sure that I have a lot of different types of interactions on my schedule within my own company. And so that I'm not just getting stuck with interacting with the same people all the time. And so I love to interact with people that are closer to our customers and sometimes even with our customers. And so make sure I've got a fair amount of diversity in my schedule in terms of topics and people that I'm interacting with, because we've got a lot of industry knowledge and I can learn a lot from the people that I work with. I think that's number one. I think number two is really create a culture where people are sharing information outside the organization as well, right? And that's really important. Sometimes it's an interesting podcast that somebody might listen to in the space. Sometimes it's a case study on another business in a completely different space. And so we do a lot of that. Sometimes those are podcasts, sometimes those are articles. I just had one from our president of our company sent me one over about your why this morning that we're all reading. And so creating that culture where it's a knowledge share information is really, really key. And then, I think the third thing is making sure you actually have an environment where people are kind of comfortable challenging you and creating that conversation, because what I worry about in my role is people just tell me what I want to hear. And that's the worst possible scenario for any leader.
It is,
They don't actually know what's happening, but the reality is it's really easy to fall in that trap. So I think if you can create a safe and authentic environment and actually have a dialogue at all sorts of different levels in the organization, kind of helps you keep you grounded in terms of what's really happening. So it's just a combination of internal and external information.
It's so funny you say that, because every month we bring together a group of chief HR officers in a closed environment, so of no recording or media or vendors, and they discuss some of their core challenges. And I asked the group recently, what's the main value you get out of joining these groups? They're free. It's just something we do to help the community. And they say, but I get challenged. And I was like, what do you mean? Because, Chris, it's very rare that I'm in a room. Think about it, they're in a room with 29 other CHROs who are challenging their ideas. And they go, yes, sometimes it could become quite a heated conversations, but they love it. They're like, Chris, I love being challenged. So I'm completely with you on that one. And people can definitely relate to that. Do you feel like the higher you became, kind of went up the ranks in the business, the less feedback you got to where you are now?
Yeah, I think you've got to be much more active at actually getting feedback.
Yeah.
And you've got to do it in a variety of different ways, right? And so whether that's, I'll do roundtables with different parts of the organization and really try to create an environment where people will be honest, sometimes more successfully than others. But, that's an element of sometimes interacting with customers. And then I really like to do deep dives in a specific area. Sometimes, candidly, it drives my team nuts because they're thinking, why is the CEO worried about this? But if you pick a topic and you just dive deep to figure out, hey, what are we really doing well? Where do we have gaps? It shows people that you're really interested and that you care, number one. And number two, you always learn a lot. And sometimes you learn great things that you're doing that you didn't know, but sometimes you learn a lot of gaps you might have. And so that's another tactic I really like to be able to do. And sometimes they feel randomized in terms of areas that I might be doing deep dives on, but that's the purpose, is to make sure that I'm not shielded. And the worst thing we can do as a CEO is believe all the marketing. Right? Oh, we're as good as all of our marketing material. You've got to be hard on yourself as an organization. And doing those types of things, I think, keeps me a little bit more closer to what's actually happening.
Yeah, definitely. Especially now, we need to be as close as possible. I can see the picture of your family behind you. How would your family describe what you do for a living?
So my kids are 14, 16, 18, and 20. And I still get that question from my older kids. You said, Paylocity. So I think it's payroll. So I must have had this conversation with each of my kids so many times in terms of what we do. And I think they would probably describe something to do with paying people is probably as far as we would get in that explanation. And then I try to explain to them all the other software things that we're doing. And it gets a little harder. But it's funny, when we first rolled out the first version of Community, kind of our social interaction platform, one of my first users was my daughter. And so this is actually a really funny story. So I'm not a big social media platform. So I said, hey, listen, we have all these emojis on social media now in our platform. And I want to be interacting with people and be active. Like, show me, like, how should I react? Like, is this a thumbs up?
It's so true, though.
Happy face? And honestly, I didn't really know. And it was so funny because some of the things she was saying to me, oh, that's very standard. That's not very personalized. This would be a much more personal emoji. Right. And so at the time, she was probably 17. And so 3 or 4 years ago. And I had that whole conversation with her. And so I do try to involve them in terms of getting into the minds of the next generation of the worker. And there's lots of examples where they kind of have certainly helped me. If I send them a text with capital letters, that's something that they think is just totally ridiculous.
Don't shout at me.
Yeah. I mean, so all these little things that you obviously you kind of learn over time, but I tried to involve them in actually looking at some of the things that we're actually building and try to get a younger person's mind on it.
Yeah, they are the future, right? They're the future people that will be using it every day. And so that's a great idea. How have you taken care of your own personal, big thing we've learned through the pandemic is everything around mental health and well-being as well. How have you taken care of your own mental health and well-being during the last year?
I'm a big advocate of kind of trying something different and setting different goals, right? As an example. And, one of the things that I started doing just prior to the pandemic, but probably got into it more at the pandemic, is I actually just started doing yoga. And that's probably not my natural personality. I think even people at work would kind of laugh at me and say, oh, who's this Zen Steve? Because I can be kind of an intense person. But it was something very different. It challenged me both physically and mentally to be able to do that. And that's something that I try to encourage people is this has been a really tough year. And it doesn't have to be, any one activity or the next. Some people have just, the other thing I do is I cook dinner a lot. I never cooked dinner before very often. And so because I wasn't home and I wasn't getting home till late, but being at home, I was able to do a lot more and do some of that even with my kids. And so for me, it's find something different and new to stimulate your mind in a different way so that you can get out of the repetition of kind of the workday and learn something new that way. And honestly, it's great if it's a combination of physical and mental escape to be able to do that. And that has really kind of helped me through the last year. And I encourage, not only the people that I work with, but my friends and family to do the same. Something different.
Yeah. And the last question, what's one thing about the business that you're most excited about moving forward?
Yeah. We were kind of on this march to try to build a more modern HR platform before the pandemic. And in many ways, I was having a hard time sometimes even getting some of our internal stakeholders on board with that mission. And because sometimes they were talking to customers and they're like, I just want to get my employees paid and make sure that people kind of clock in on time. And I don't really care as much about some of these other things. And then there's other employers who are really modern and really interested in that. So what I'm really excited about is we can now accelerate our vision of that. And I mentioned this modern workforce index. I don't think we could have ever launched that if it wasn't for the pandemic and that becoming more important, because I just don't think it would have resonated as well.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
I think, part of our goal is to make it to allow our clients to be a better employer and to make a better workplace. And I think we have a way bigger opportunity now than we did before because of the openness that a lot of our users have. And so I've always been excited about that opportunity. I felt like it was further in the distance. And it feels much more rewarding than just, getting people paid on time, which is important, right? But it's a much more rewarding mission. And so I'm really excited about being able to do more with that goal and the fact that our users are much more ready for it. And it also really opens up the opportunity around creativity and innovation in a completely different way that goes beyond digital transformation.
Yeah. Well, there's never been a more exciting time to be in this space, let's be honest.
That's exactly how I feel.
And never as a challenging time too, though. So for everyone.
They often go together, right? The excitement and the challenge go together.
Yeah, it's true. Well, honestly, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been a real pleasure. I hope you had fun. And
I really appreciate you having me.
It was nice to. And last thing, where can people connect with you? If they want to reach out to you personally, Steve, and say hello, where's the best place for them to reach you?
Yeah, LinkedIn's probably the easiest for a lot of us, right? So you just search for my name on LinkedIn. Pretty active in responding on LinkedIn and staying up to date. And I'd be happy to connect with anybody. Amazing. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to chatting again soon, okay? All right. Thanks. Have a good one. See ya. Bye-bye.